Looks like there's still a couple people in the waiting room. Okay, is everybody ready? Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's session, Enhancing First-Gen Low-Income Student Success. My name is Michelle Wiley, and I am the Director of Academic Development in the Office of Online Student Success at World Campus, and I will be your facilitator today, co-facilitator. I want to just remind everybody that today's session is being recorded and will be available in the Hoover platform for 3 months following today's event.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nicole Hallowell. I'm an academic advisor and Tri Alpha Honor Society advisor at Penn State Lehigh Valley. Also wanted to remind you to participate in today's session. We are in a Zoom meeting format, but the chat is available in the Hoover platform. So please just remember you could post in the Q&A tab in Hoover or in the chat tab as we go through today's session. And then also don't forget to participate in the community boards in the Hoover platform.
As a reminder, you can enable closed captioning at the bottom of your Zoom window at any time. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome, everyone. I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Michelle and Nicole. Hi, everybody. I'm Denise Poole, and I am the Director of Student Success Initiatives overseeing the Student Success Center at University Park. And I'm joined today by the staff of the Student Success Center. And I think what I'll go ahead and do is I'll just, team, if it's okay, just go ahead and give a quick introduction to your name and role, and then we'll go to our plan of kind of going a little bit deeper into who we are as students and how we have arrived to this work. So Chelsea.
Hello, everyone. So good to see some familiar names in the room. My name is Chelsea Walls. I'm the Assistant Director of the Student Success Center. Shadika.
Hello, everyone. Again, it's amazing to see some familiar names here. My name is Shadika Good. I'm the Student Success Advocate and also the co-advisor for the First Gen Advocate Student Organization. Thank you for coming here today.
So before we leave this screen of introductions, as a staff, we decided to share with you a little bit about our own personal journeys as students throughout our education and a little bit of our careers. And so obviously within the Hoover app, you can go and look at our professional profiles, but some details that you won't find on my profile, but that are important and have really brought me to this moment in my own career are that, you know, I am a first generation student. I come from a low income family background. I was a Pell recipient. I did attend a 4-year private institution, but that was thanks to a partial athletic scholarship that did require me to work pretty much every day and travel most weekends all year round for 3 seasons. So I very much view that role as a student athlete. And I think about that as I reflect on it as a job and a means to my education. You know, in addition to these responsibilities, I also held work study positions on campus. My father was, he worked in facilities for the University of Pennsylvania for many years. And as a benefit for his employment, I did receive some portable tuition from UPenn. So thanks UPenn for that. And my mother was home with us after school, but worked as a housekeeper outside of the home, and then later became a dental assistant once we got a little bit older. And, you know, I think kind of thinking of my background and as we think and reflect on our own backgrounds, when I look back at my experience as a student athlete, and also as somebody who felt like for many years a little bit out of place and just sort of confused with the whole system of things in higher education, it's important to kind of share those details because that's really helped me arrive to this position of the work that I do now and how we support students through the Student Success Center. So I did spend the majority of my career supporting student athletes. So 15 out of my 22 years in higher education was spent in student athlete academic support services and compliance. And then it sort of evolved into helping first generation students and students that had barriers to completing their degree, which brought me to Penn State about 5 years ago. So Chelsea?
So I am also a first-gen student. I think like many other individuals, I didn't realize I was first-gen. I knew I was going to be the first person in my family to get a college degree. And actually, I remember the first time I like verbally acknowledged that with my parents. They were like, well, don't tell people that. We don't want people you go to school with to know that we don't have college degrees. Like there was a level of embarrassment from them. I, you know, just obviously out of a place of like, they wanted me, I think, to fit in. And so I remember being like, oh, okay, I won't tell anyone that I'm the first in our family to get a degree. And so it's like, obviously looking back again, I'm sure many of you relate to this. If you do, please put it in the chat in Whova. But like looking back, so many of the things I experienced, I was incredibly homesick early on. You know, just like I didn't know how to navigate a college campus. And I went to a very, very small school. I went to a private liberal arts college, which I also had no concept of how expensive that was. Right. So another kind of symptom of being first gen. But I had incredible upperclassmen and faculty and staff mentors who honestly, I kind of just like blindly followed. Like I had an upperclassman who was like, my first year, first semester, she was like, hey, you should really sit down and like map out what classes you're going to take every semester. And I was like, oh, that seems like a good thing I should do, right? So I was really fortunate to have some great role models who helped guide me. And my undergraduate experience was completely transformational. Being at a small institution, you knew everybody, the faculty were really in your corner. And I just had really incredible mentors who said, hey, you know, you can make this a career. And 11 years later, here I am. And just really trying to pay it forward in the same way that I had faculty and staff do that for me. So that's a little bit kind of about my journey. I will say my dad did 1 year of college, but was drafted into the military, which is a little bit of a unique kind of story. So he was actually hoping I would go the military route. I did not, but thankful for where it's led me. So Shadika, over to you.
Oh my. Hi, everyone. So I am also a first generation college student and also from a low income family, Pell Grant recipient. So I always say my entrance into college was a strange one because in my household, I was one of 7 children, single parent. She worked overnight, so there was a lot of policing of ourselves. Academic schoolwork was never a big thing in our house, so I did homework because I wanted to. I went to the library because I wanted to. It was never because I was told to or encouraged to. It was just something that I wanted to do. So kind of coming to Penn State when I was 8, I decided I was coming to Penn State and be a veterinarian. That simple, very headstrong. I, in fact, did not become a veterinarian, but I have been at Penn State at least since 2009 when I started. I got my undergraduate here, and that was a very chaotic experience. So I didn't necessarily join any, I call it real extracurricular activities, so clubs. We started like a Star Wars club, but then that fell through because I also never had less than 1 job in college. It was always between 2 or 3. So I've been a waitress, auxiliary police, a teacher's assistant, a car lot attendee, and worked at the Commons, of course. So I think, I always say, I might not be the smartest, but I am one of the most curious people, which led me to a bunch of different unique experiences in my life. And honestly, as a first-gen student, I probably would have not gotten as far as I did unless I met my actual mentor, whom, funny story, I just went in his office and complained about my situation, and he's been dealing with me ever since. So I did know at a certain point in my undergraduate career that I did want to help other students like myself. I didn't know that it had a name to it until I got into my position at Career Services, which lasted for about 5 years. And that's also when I decided, oh, I can get a master's in this. Let's do this. I want to help students like me. So that's kind of my weird, strange, chaotic story is that I wasn't the most high achieving first gen student out there. I was normal, just trying to get by and working. So that's also where a lot of my passion come in as well, because it's not just only the high achieving first gen students, but also our average students, as we'll call them. Those are just trying to get by and need to understand the importance of non-academic experiences as well.
Thank you both for sharing. So that sets us up nicely. I'm gonna actually let Shadika keep going and talk a little bit about what we hope that you all get out of this session this afternoon.
Now that you've met all of your fabulous presenters for today, let's get into the aim of today's presentations. We're going to delve into several key learning objectives that will not only deepen our understanding, but also empower us to enhance our support for first-generation low-income students here at Penn State. So our first objective is to understand how first-gen low-income students are identified, with also a clarification process of how Penn State view first-generation students and low-income students. Then we're going to seek awareness of systemic barriers faced by first-generation low-income students. Certain challenges extend beyond individual circumstances because it's within system inequalities that's presented within the education system. Then we're going to explore how our students are currently supported at Penn State. It's essential to know what existing initiatives and resources are available. Lastly, we're going to evaluate how implementing a holistic student success approach can enhance support for first-gen low-income students. So not only addressing the students' academics, but also addressing aspects of the student's entire experience as they're in school. So by understanding how first-gen low-income students are identified, recognizing systemic challenges, exploring existing support systems and resources, and implementing a holistic approach to student success, we can collectively work toward creating a more equitable and inclusive educational experience for our students. Now, let's take off on this journey of learning together.
Okay, so let's talk about what we mean when we talk about first-gen low income. Hopefully, at this point in the summit, we're all on the same page about how Penn State defines first-generation students. But just for the sake of putting it out into the space, a student whose parents or legal guardians have not completed a baccalaureate degree, that is how Penn State defines first-gen. We also recognize that there are students who really identify with the first-gen identity and may not fit this, like our definition. For example, we have a lot of international students who are the first in their family to go to college in the US. I know like there's still validity in that experience. First Gen Advocates, our student organization, they're like, hey, if you feel like you're first gen, come hang with us. We had a student at our lunch with Alejandra today who said, I'm in school, but my mom is also in school right now. Do I count as first gen? And we're like, sure, we love that. But that is Penn State's definition of first gen. The low income definition comes directly from the Department of Education, and that is an individual whose family's taxable income for the preceding year did not exceed 150% of the poverty level. So that's just to provide a little context to those two terms, which obviously we're going to be focusing on quite a bit for the rest of our presentation.
So in an earlier session, it was brought up, I think it was our colleagues at the Harrisburg campus, were talking a little bit about data and where to collect data on first generation students across Penn State. And so for those of you that were in the session, we're going to talk a little bit about that now. So what you're looking at now is just a snapshot, a screenshot rather, from our data digest. So if you go to Data Digest Penn State, you'll see a series of Power BI dashboards that you all have access to. These are publicly available. It's a publicly available information. And what you're seeing before you is the snapshot of first generation undergraduate students who are full-time at the university as of fall 2023. So this is census information. So that's typically updated once a year based on the cycle of the census. So this shows that across all of our campuses, including World Campus, we have 15,506 students who identified as first gen. Now, before I get into sort of the breakdown as what you're seeing in some of these other maps and tables here on the screen before you, I do want to say that it's important to note that the first gen indicator, so where we're pulling this data from, is actually being collected from students during the application process. And what we're finding in smaller subsets is that this is not always accurate. While it's a really great starting point to market certain initiatives and services to this population and to recruit them for opportunities, it is not wholly accurate. Some of our colleagues in SMEAL, if you attended their session early, I don't know if they spoke about this in their presentation, but I've heard some of the challenges they face as they got their first year seminar for first gen students off the ground this past year. And they found that the indicator for their population this year was only about 72% accurate. Now, why that is, we don't exactly know. We don't know if students are just misreading this question on the application, or if there's some kind of error. Maybe for some of them, they feel maybe it's an advantage. I don't really know what the intention is, why students are clicking the box or not checking off that their parents, maybe they don't know their parents have higher degrees. I don't know. Sometimes high school students can be a little out of touch with what their parents have accomplished. It's the truth. But for whatever reason, it's not accurate, and it's not verified in any other way once a student is enrolled with us at Penn State. And that's something that, as a Student Success Center, we're actually trying to advocate to change. We want to be able to give students the opportunity to see that they have that indicator on their record and to be able to update it, or to say, actually, no, I didn't realize that this was me, but it is me, and let us know about that. So based on the information that we have available right now in the data digest, you can see that a majority of the students that are first generation are coming where those bigger bubbles are across the, at least in state of Pennsylvania. Well, majority are in state, but within the state, they're coming from closer to our cities, as you can see. But a lot of those other bubbles across all pockets of the state really add up to a larger population. So there are many students that are also coming from rural areas. Across the United States, you can see some of those larger bubbles, again, mostly in the Northeast, which, you know, is no surprise that on the right side of your screen, as you probably have already seen, that we have our second largest population identifying as coming from New York. So it's Philadelphia, followed by New York, that's New York State, and then New Jersey, and then followed down into a little bit more of the county level there. So, so that information is available. It's actually kind of fun to play with. You can look around. We took it a step further just because we're exploring intersections today and talking about this, you know, it's concept of intersectionality, which we'll go back into a little bit more detail in a few slides, but and how it creates opportunities or barriers to retention and success. And so one of an interesting breakdown is when we look at our first generation, and again, this is just first gen, this is not adding in income, but we break it down by race. So you can see that across that 15,000 plus, that over half of those students do identify as white. And that shouldn't be surprising. We are at a predominantly white institution. But you can see here the breakdown of students from other racial backgrounds as our enrollment numbers showed per this past fall. But when we look a little closer at the breakdown of students who have identified as first generation, or that we have marked as first generation as an institution, you'll see much higher percentages of students that are first generation within non-white races and ethnic backgrounds. So this is something just to keep in mind, and I know this is pretty common in the literature. If you've done research or you're working with first generation students, this is probably not surprising to you. But this is information that we purely pulled from Penn State data to share with all of you as Penn State colleagues, just to be aware of our population demographic breakdowns. Chelsea, do you want to talk a little bit about income?
Sure. So low income, I will say through our work in the Student Success Center, we do have access to financial information that I recognize many of you maybe do not have this level of access to this information, but some of these stats here are publicly available on the university's websites or in different press releases that they put out. Penn State defines low income as a student whose family can cover only 25% or less of their educational costs. Only 50% of students from the highest financial need households at Penn State graduate within 6 years. We have over 17,000 Pell Grant recipients university-wide. And we looked at some of our information that we have access to, and it's estimated that 38% of first-gen students are also Pell eligible. So again, as we're looking at that intersection of first-gen and low income, that's a pretty significant percentage. And that's just Pell eligible. You know, you might still have high needs and be just below that Pell threshold. So that's just kind of one measure that I think a lot of individuals in higher ed look at. You know, if you're a Pell Grant recipient or Pell eligible, you're low income and high need. But as I'm sure many of you know, sometimes the FAFSA only tells part of the story, or the circumstances have changed since the FAFSA was filled out, or a student is still incredibly high need and just below that eligibility level for Pell. So that's just the students who are at that higher level of need is 38%.
And then one other thing that we as a Student Success Center talk about quite a bit is this is only capturing, when we talk about eligibility, this is only capturing information for our FAFSA filers. So we do have a lot of low income students that don't file their FAFSA for various reasons. One might be that they're in a scholars program that is paying for most of their tuition, so they don't see the benefit in filing their financial aid application. And in those cases, those students, you know, may still be struggling with their living expenses and covering the support for their basic needs. So those are students that the data is not necessarily going to identify because they don't have that information on record. And we do assess need based on the free application for federal aid. So when thinking about this, and this is just a snapshot of data collection and sources, there are many other ways. And then I know many of you are aware that there are many other supports, both in our local areas and our colleges and on our campus, of folks that are analyzing data and doing really interesting things with data. And I think as an institution, there are different systems that we are now using, such as Starfish Analytics. And, you know, even though that doesn't focus on finances, but, you know, that are giving us interesting insights into student experiences and the potential risks that the student might face in progressing towards completing their degree. But I think when we, as a Student Success Center, focus on our support for first gen and how we are thinking about supporting first generation students who are particularly identify as low or limited income, that we think about how do we create equity in this experience? How do we see what the student is bringing to their situation and the real barriers that this particular circumstance that they are in is creating for their experience? So the question here that we pose is, why does differentiated support for first-gen low-income students matter? So you can pop some ideas in the chat if you'd like, just your quick response, like why does it matter to create more equitable supports for this particular population? And I realize it is late in the afternoon. It's been a long day for all of us. So if we're not exactly active in the chat, it's okay. But be thinking about it, I guess, as we move forward. And I think a big part of why differentiated care, differentiated support and approach matter comes back to the theme of our summit today, which is intersectionality. So as I mentioned earlier, just a few high-level important facts about the research body that is intersectionality. You know, I emphasize this, and hopefully it's gone, some of our presenters have gone into a bit more detail in their individual concurrent sessions. But if you leave this conference knowing anything about the research on intersectionality, please walk away knowing that intersectionality is more than just having multiple identities. Intersectionality is a body of research that really began as a framework that was created by Kimberly Crenshaw several decades ago now. But it really highlights how not only somebody can possess different identities, as we all do, but how those individual identities, such as race, sexuality, class, and gender, intersect and overlap to influence one's experience and creating really different opportunities or barriers to success. And that's not only in education, but that's also in our professional careers as well. This framework has a whole bunch of phenomenal researchers who have taken it in different directions to analyze various marginalized communities. And I do encourage you to do a little bit research and digging if you're not as familiar with some of these researchers, but folks like Patricia Hill Collins and Bell Hooks, Andre Lord and Angela Davis, just to name a few, have done some phenomenal work in this space. And really what it comes down to is thinking about this idea of power and privilege. And so when we think specifically about why differentiated care matters for first generation low income students, we need to look no further than this wheel of power and privilege, which hopefully many of you have seen this several times throughout your career at this point. But it's really good to think about this and reflect as we're building our programs and services for students, and think about how their experiences and how they're moving through these systems of higher education matter, and how we can support them in that journey. And so right off the top, when we think about being low income or coming from a poorer household, or having your family be of a lower formal education status, puts you more into those marginalized status communities. And then if you layer additional identities that are marginalized in our society on top of this, it creates more barriers and challenges for that student to succeed. Now, that's not to say that the students aren't coming to us with strengths. And I've kind of repeated this. If any of you attended the session we did in the advising conference, I did a first gen session with some wonderful colleagues back in the fall in the advising conference. And I use this slide to kind of explain that it is important for us to take a strengths-based or assets-based approach to our work with student athletes, I almost said, I'm sorry, first generation students, student athletes too. But we also have to recognize the experiences that they're bringing with them, and how they're seeing their experience and what they see as recognizable to them in the resources available on our respective campuses, in our spaces. So this is just an example. You've probably seen some of this branding that we've pushed out to really encourage students to see those strengths and those phenomenal assets that they're bringing to the community, to the Penn State community. But at the same time, we do have to continue to recognize and think about what are some of those pitfalls and gaps that students might fall into that makes it just a little bit more challenging for them to find the resources they need in a timely fashion. So Chelsea's going to talk a little bit about some of those challenges, and we're going to start off by talking a little bit about the challenges that first-gen low-income students face before their enrollment.
Some of these on this list, or maybe all of these, none of them feel overly surprising. But, you know, as Denise had mentioned earlier about, as we look at low-income data at the university, that's what we know based on students who filled out their FAFSA. And again, there's a lot of students who don't, for a variety of reasons. I think this generation of students are very cognizant of taking loans and view loans as a very scary thing. And so they're finding other ways, or trying to find other ways to finance their education. There might be just a lack of knowledge about how to fill out the FAFSA or how to approach financial aid. And those, you know, that's a big reality for these students, especially if you're coming from a low income household, or you haven't had a parent who's gone through this process themselves, or went through this process in, you know, a different country, or, you know, like there's a lot of layers to that. Another challenge for first gen low income students is institution selectivity. So students from this intersection of first gen low income are more likely to choose a 2-year institution, public institution, schools that are much less selective, just because they feel like they're maybe not welcome, or they don't belong in other spaces. They're also really making their decisions based on cost of attendance. So it ties into that financial aid and that last bullet point there on our list. Being first gen, and this is something I think Alejandra addressed really in such a lovely way, having limited parental or familial support, that's not a knock on the families for some of these students, right? You can have incredibly supportive families, but they don't have the institutional knowledge, right? They don't know how to not work the system, but they don't know how to understand the system of higher education. So even if they're like, yes, we want you to get a college degree, they maybe can't help you in that journey or can't relate to what you're going through as a student or what you might be, going to be experiencing by the time you actually get on campus. Financial barriers, obviously being from a low income background, application fees are real. So there is research that shows students from this population of first-gen low income applied to less institutions. That also goes back to that institution selectivity. And then limited access to guidance counselors or college advisors, or again, just getting some of that guidance to say like, hey, this is a direction you should consider going.
And one other thing I'll add here, Chelsea, and I know you and I have talked about this many times, is when we think about cost of attendance, while that aspect may deter students, sometimes they're not thinking enough about cost attendance, right? And the realities of their situation, because they're looking and they're just sort of have figured things out. These are students that are typically very resourceful, right? That are coming to our college campuses and they've figured out so much to get to that point. And they're like, well, I'm not going to worry about it right now, or not really thinking about the full cost of like what it would really mean to spend 5 years or 6 years, or, not be going well above that 12 credit. They're not thinking advance about these things, to Chelsea's point, to the systems that we know to be so familiar in higher education. So it's a lot of complexity there.
Well, and as I shared in kind of my introduction, that was true for me. I went to a private liberal arts college a decade ago, and trust, like many of us out there, I'm paying my loans off, right? And I was really fortunate to have some incredible financial aid, but I had no concept of what that cost actually meant. And so I do think that is also true for many other first-time students. So we talked about some challenges before enrollment. Let's talk about challenges for first-time low-income students when they're actually here on campus with us. This is from Forbes, correct, Denise? So these are national stats about first-gen students in particular, but it is not a far stretch to then layer that low-income lens on top of this and see similar challenges. First-generation students are less likely to participate in extracurricular organizations compared to their continuing generation peers. A big part of that is needing to work, right? Or not knowing where to get involved or how to get involved or what that looks like. First-gen students are more likely to come from low-income backgrounds, as we've talked about, or minority backgrounds. They're more likely to be parents, caregivers, veterans, or first-generation Americans. And then we also see fewer first-gen college students participate in what we all know as higher education professionals to be these high-impact engagement opportunities: study abroad, research and fellowships, leadership positions on campus, utilizing career planning events and services, and then also paid internships. We all know there's a lot of pressure on students to get internships to then get a job after graduation. But if the only thing a student is offered is an unpaid internship, they're either going to take that and stack multiple jobs on top of it. That was true of my experience while I was an undergrad. I can't think of a single summer where I wasn't working 3 jobs. Or they're not even going for those opportunities because they might pay less than the jobs that they're working to be able to support themselves. So these students are not taking advantage of these opportunities simply because they maybe don't have the privilege to do that. That's on the engagement side of challenges during enrollment. This is even more alarming, right? This is basic needs. So when we're talking about basic needs, right, we're talking about food, shelter, being able to keep an apartment roof over their head, being able to pay for their bills. Obviously, we have this hierarchy of needs here that many of you, I'm sure, have seen a zillion times. But the university put out their basic needs food and housing survey. I believe that was 2022 now when that survey was released. That is all public. But more than 14% of students said that within the last 30 days, they did not eat for an entire day due to being unable to afford food. That basic need food and housing survey, you layer some of these identities from underrepresented populations, and the results are even more staggering. So this was just the student population at Penn State holistically. But if you were to really drill down into being from some of these underrepresented identities, those numbers are even higher. And I can speak just from our work here in the Student Success Center that I've had students come to me saying, I've gone 5 days without eating because I need to pay my rent. Like, this is a very real problem at all of our campuses, but definitely a real problem at University Park that I don't think we acknowledge enough. And there's some incredible resources available, but this is a real challenge. There's also employment. So as we've talked about, many students are having to work while they are in school. More than 68% of University Park students are working 11+ hours a week to support themselves. That number is much higher at our campuses. And again, this is just students across the board. You drill down into some of these other populations of students, and those numbers are much higher. And we're seeing students who are working much higher than 11 hours a week. This all leads to challenges after graduation. So obviously we're here to talk about our students and how to support our students. But students from first generation and low income backgrounds are more likely to be under or unemployed after graduation. You can see some of these numbers here and they really speak for themselves. They are more likely to have larger amounts of student loan debt. They are going to have less lifetime wealth and a lower median household income than their continuing generation peers. And as Alejandra, again, going back to the keynote address, as she talked about, there's also for many first-gen low-income students an obligation to get a job to then be able to support their families. Not true for all first-gen students, but true for many of them. And so these students are often so eager to get the first opportunity that comes their way, and it's maybe much higher paying than what their parents have had, but it's still much less than their peers. So these are real challenges that persist. And we've had some incredible alumni over the 3 years of the summit who've talked about, like, your first gen identity doesn't stop once you graduate. Like, your first gen in the workforce, your first gen in graduate school. And so these are just some of the challenges that this population of students are facing after they leave us.
Okay, so we're learning a lot of information. I'm going to give you a bit more. Now, there's a lot of great efforts across Penn State University to support first generation students, so much that we are ranked number 4 for the best college for first generation college students from Best Colleges in 2003, which is a little fun fact to know that everyone should know. So let's talk a little bit more about what got us kind of that ranking and due to our current efforts. So here at Penn State, for first generation low income students, we have scholarship aid available. We have peer-to-peer advocacy and mentorships, scholars programs, professional development, coalition building, curriculum-based programming. So think your first year seminars and us trying to integrate first year seminars as well, and also global opportunities. In order to dive more into specifically what the Student Success Center is doing, I am going to pass it off to Denise.
Thank you, Sharika. So those are some general interventions that we see, right? That we think about, like, how do we support this group? Those are sort of blanket kind of practices that have grown and that we've started to try to scale to meet the needs of our various populations in each of our local spaces. As a Student Success Center, so I didn't emphasize this very much in the beginning, but our office is just coming up on 5 years old. We actually opened our doors at the end of summer of 2019. And so kind of got a little bit of a slower start and really didn't intentionally start working in partnership with first generation students on campus here at University Park until closer to the end of 2020 and 2021. And so since that time, just realizing that there were a lot of great programs and services that were supporting first generation students across the university, but they were sort of nested in individual colleges and campuses or for identity-based groups, that we wanted to try and bring the voices of those groups together, hence why we're all here today. So some of the things that we did we've done in the last few years is on a national level, we joined the NASPA First Gen Forward program, which has really bolstered our ability to connect with our national peers and to learn from them, but then to also better highlight the amazing work that's being done across Penn State. We've started coalition building, things like our First Gen Advisory Council, which many of you have participated in over the last 2 years. That has really grown in popularity. We're a small staff. We wouldn't be able to pull off this wonderful summit today without the help of those individuals. And actually, Michelle and Nicole, our facilitators, were recruited into this work because of their role on the First Gen Advisory Council. So thank you both. Then our events to bring transparency and to highlight our community. We have our First Gen celebration each fall, and then this is our 3rd year of our First Gen Student Support Summit. And we've also focused a lot on the peer-to-peer community building aspect of First Gen support. And so we have now been advising First Gen advocates for 2 years, and we are about to launch a chapter of Tri Alpha in just a few short weeks. So this also, many of the work that we've done on the space that kind of blends into the income conversations and more conversation about financial barriers and hardship really overlaps with the work that my office, the Student Success Center office team does to support the Open Doors program Complete Penn State. So Chelsea's going to talk a little bit about the outcomes there.
Also, I recognize we are coming up on time, but obviously we can talk about this topic all day long because we do. So through Complete Penn State, if you're unfamiliar with that program, it is a degree completion program that our office took over when we opened our doors 5 years ago. It has a scholarship component primarily for students who are within their final 2 semesters before graduation who are experiencing financial hardship. Last fiscal year, we awarded 870 students. Of those awardees who had a FAFSA on file, students who had high financial needs, so again, can cover less than 25% of their educational expenses. Almost 60% of our awardees were in that category, and 25% were at the highest level of need that the university can quantify and give a number to. That is I mean, that's almost 200 students who just were awarded. We had closer to 1,400, 1,600 students who came through our pipeline entirely. These were just the students we were able to award. I mean, you can see there that a large majority of them are first generation, or a large percentage are first gen and Pell eligible. And again, that's what we know based on the number of students with FAFSA on file.
So I think we've learned a lot from Complete Penn State. I had taken that program over when I first started, and it's really grown in leaps and bounds. And we do try to take a holistic approach there, but we are working with, as Chelsea mentioned, a very high percentage of low-income students through that program. So I'm gonna, Chelsea, if it's okay, I'm just gonna go through this because I know we've got a lot of other slides we wanted to get through. So some of the things we're looking forward to as a Student Success Center is that we've been working on kind of behind the scenes. Some of you are a little bit involved in this, but again, we're a new office, so a lot of these initiatives are new. Is that we've been piloting an academic life coaching program actually with Michelle Wiley and her team in World Campus. We've been working across the university with colleagues to really do a lot of work and training in the area of academic life coaching. And so we see this as an opportunity in the future to scale for first generation students, at least here at University Park, through the service that we would be providing as an office. We've been talking with Residence Life about living learning communities here at UP. We are hoping to take Carly Wood's great work at the York campus with the Nittany Scholars Program. They're actually visiting University Park today. But we've done some work to look. I encourage you to check out that program. And then I know, Alexa, you're on the call. I think I saw you in the chat, the Aspire program, and there's a wonderful program at Abington too. So, you know, we've kind of looked at all of these phenomenal programs going on with smaller campuses to see, you know, what could we blend together to make work for students that are at University Park. And many of those students are also 2+2 students, and they're benefiting from those programs. And their smaller campus, when they get here, they feel overwhelmed. So we're looking at potentially launching a Nittany Scholars program here at University Park. And then we're looking to really grow our partnerships in these areas where first generation low-income students need a bit more support and infrastructure. So that's research and fellowships, all of those high impact practice areas, financial literacy education, more support surrounding student aid and how to work with their parents to talk about these tough financial aid conversations, early career service intervention, trying to work with our parents and families office to support them in their efforts to engage the parents of first generation students earlier in the process and to really educate them on how best to support their student. And then our work with summer bridge programs, which started last summer. So you'll be seeing more from us in this area. We just kind of wanted to give you a taste of what we've been working on. And really, this is also modeled on some of what we're hearing from other institutions and learning through our spaces like the NASPA First Gen Forward program. So Shadika is going to talk a little bit about what she found, some of the great things other institutions are doing.
Okay, awesome. I noticed that we're almost at time, so I want to speed through this. So I know that we focused a lot on Penn State today, which is great because we are ranked number 4 for first generation students to come attend our college, and we are all Penn Stater. But let's have a quick look of what our colleagues around different institutions are doing, specifically for the intersection of first generation and low-income students. So starting off with Harvard, they are having their second annual First Gen Low-Income Visibility Week. This is where they host 25 events with over 40 hours of programming. And one of their main goals was to engage with first gen low-income students on campus, recognizing them and uplifting their needs on campus. Next, we're going to go right into Temple University. Temple has Temple First, which is a chapter of the Collective Success Network, which is like a volunteer-run Philadelphia-based nonprofit that supports first-gen low-income students. And what stood out to me from Temple University is that they are primarily focusing this on careers, so transitioning these students into the professional world. Then we're going to hop into the University of Richmond. So they have their first generation low income Spider FLI. It's a program that offers information just about college, networking, leadership experience, mentoring, community building, and also recognizing and celebrating the accomplishment of their first gen students who are also low income. Next, we have Johns Hopkins University, their Hop in Summer program, which is the 5-week summer program that allows a cohort that are specific first generation and low income Pell eligible to build community and experience academic and social life at Johns Hopkins before they attend the university. They will also, if they continue with the program, they will also get constant assistance throughout their college years, so additional funding such as book loans and more. Next, we have MIT, who also has a first gen and low income program, and they are offering more of a holistic academic and programming, which focus on their 4 pillars of success in academics, professional development, community, and advocacy. Next, we're going to go into Yale University, which also has a first generation low income community initiative. And their initiative was created because they wanted to include more diverse social economics students at their university, and they wanted them to feel included, welcome, supported, and have Yale University accessible for all. So they did a giant campus-wide partnership and advocacy for resources and helping these students foster identity. Then finally, we have the University of Pennsylvania, Penn First Plus. I will highly recommend go visit their website. It is quite amazing, very modern, very put together. And they are promoting inclusion and excellence of their first generation students and low income students. And they're collaborating with their undergraduate colleges and faculty members to kind of have more inclusive curricula, holistic advising for undergraduates, and they also provide programming and promoting the importance of, again, social economic diversity in academia. Now, all of these initiatives share a common thread of eliminating the stigma of being low income, which has been prevalent in higher education for a while. So they are all actively advocating for the importance of social economic diversity in higher education. Yes.
So I think, thank you, Shadika, for the recap. And I think these are just a few examples that we found that we really wanted to highlight for all of you And I think as we move forward as a Student Success Center, what we would like to do is follow suit. I mean, a lot of institutions are trying to, as Shadika said, break down that stigma and have students not feel ashamed of the fact that they're coming from backgrounds where they didn't come from a lot of resource or wealth. And so how do we, when we talk about changing that in social mobility, recognize where a student is coming from and meeting them where they are is important. And that also sometimes comes with being able to have tough conversations with a student about, what is feasible and trying to chart a course for them that is going to make the most sense given their resources, which is tough to do. But I think through methods like, coaching and learning a little bit more about how to have those tough conversations is really important so that you can help the students feel empowered and to realize that there are a lot of opportunities available for them. It's just being strategic about how they take advantage of those opportunities. So I know we are right at time. I have a few other slides. There is a 10-minute break between this session and the next one. So I realize some of you may have to jump off, but I'm going to keep recording. And if you'd like to go back on the recording and catch the end, that's perfectly fine. If you need to leave and take a break, we completely understand. So we'll just keep rocking and rolling. I just have a few more slides to get through. And then additionally, if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat or the Q&A. We'd be happy to answer those throughout the rest of the conference and while you have access for the next 3 months to the platform.
And Denise, I did put in the chat as well. I know, again, people do have to hop off. Just remember you could rate this session through Whova. And again, just another reminder to participate in those community boards as the day goes on. And we do have a couple Q&As hanging out in Whova. So as we get to the end, we'll see if we can answer some of those.
All right, what do we think? Do you want to answer a few questions now? I can hold off on my considerations.
If you'd like to. Some of them are related, some are closely connected questions. Does admissions inform high school counselors about First Gen and our resources?
What was the first part of that, Nicole? I missed what you said. Does
admissions inform high school counselors about First Gen and our resources?
I think that there is a growing visibility in the high school space around first generation identity. I am observing, and I don't know if many of my colleagues who work with first gens are also realizing this, but there are more students coming to campus with that sort of fully identified, that concept of that aspect of their identity. And so I think that's happening. I also think that the recent SCOTUS decision that is now changed the way that we're able to evaluate our applicants and not using race in college admissions has put this focus more on first generation and the intersections. If we think back to that data, even at Penn State, of having more first generation students coming from racially minoritized backgrounds, there's sort of this shift a little bit. And so that may also be causing a little bit more of that conversation around what is first gen to be happening in the high school space. So we also, Chelsea and I had, we did a spend a fall day or spend a summer day, and we had some high school counselors that had come to our table. This is a year or so ago, who wanted local to State College high schools that really wanted to do a little bit more work with us so that we could engage with their first generation students. And these are high schools that were outside of our immediate district that had higher percentages of first generation students who were feeling a little underwhelmed about the possibility of college. So we're actually have been trying, and we're still trying to get even our first gen advocate student leaders to get involved and to be engaging with those high school students.
So I think that's a perfect segue to the next question, Denise. Do you have any best practices or support that we can provide to first gen students prior to them attending campus for orientation or as soon as the semester starts?
We're really trying to get into that space. As a new Student Success Center, one of the first programs, again, I was in office of one for that first year that I took over Complete Penn State. And I was starting with a population that was at the end of their academic careers. So it's taken a while to build our staff and to get into this first gen space. I know some of their campuses are doing great work in this area, such as the work being done through Lion Guides, through peer-to-peer mentorship. I think the peer-to-peer component is where it's at. I think that getting students at the campus involved in those conversations and getting them while the students are excited about their recent admission and are curious, but maybe don't want to ask an adult about the questions that they have about campus is really important. And I would also say that the research is telling us that first year experiences are also where it's at. So first year seminars, living learning communities, first year experiences for first gen where they can feel comfortable in spaces, having conversations about their financial aid and maybe, you know, concerns about home. Maybe they're getting pressure to come home every weekend because they're helping to take care of younger siblings or aging parents or whatever that might look like for them. There may be added concerns where they don't feel comfortable talking about that push and pull and how it's impacting their adjustment. So having those spaces and places for them to feel, to be able to be vulnerable is important. So I would offer that. Chelsea, Shadika.
I would also say, definitely from year one on campus, it's having honest conversations with students. I know many of you are in student-facing roles or in advising roles, about implications of decisions they're making. You know, if you want a triple major and have 4 minors, that's incredible. Can we still finish in 4 years? And let's talk about the financial impacts if we can't, and what that might mean. And let's talk about, you know, if you're within a scholars program, many of those scholarships are only, you know, good for 8 semesters. So if you're not going to complete in that time, how are you going to be able to afford your tuition? So I think having some of those honest conversations is also really important, in doing that early on. Because again, through Complete Penn State, we see students at the very end who are like, I think I might pick up another major. And we're like, let's talk about that. So I think having those conversations early and often with students about not only maybe the career impacts of their decisions, but also the financial impacts.
Yeah, absolutely. And then again, I will record the last 3 slides, but I go into some considerations about these best practices and about holistic, taking a holistic mindset into the creation of programs that are serving this population and what that actually means when you go to implement, right? And then I also talked to Chelsea's point, you know, and we talked a lot about high impact practices, but we also need to be advocating for the policies and the structural changes that are tripping these students up. Many times it's not them, they're doing exactly what they're trying to do, or they just didn't realize that late dropping 5 classes, you know, maybe there just wasn't enough time. I mean, I know for me, like it's a very short period for someone that doesn't know the system, and that can have residual impacts on their success and access to aid in the future. So they don't know what they know until they know it. And so I think we need to be able to advocate and say, this is unfair, and it's unfair to this particular portion of our population because they're coming to us maybe unaware of how this system works. And so I think, you know, financial aid and academic policies where we see like repeatedly students from certain identities and backgrounds are hitting barriers, we need to come together and try to create that change that we want to see, that we need to see for our students.
So I think this topic came up a couple times today, and we talk a lot about how knowledge is power for our first generation students. So this question kind of involves that. As academic advisors, our go-to proactive outreach is the Penn State email, but we know students don't always manage their email well, or they need to. Do you have recommendations for how we can communicate our advising messages more effectively, whether it's time to schedule an appointment with an advisor or you have a starfish flag in a particular course? How do we get that knowledge to the students?
That's a really tricky one, but like, honestly, push notifications are where it's at. We saw the impact of putting some of those COVID related alerts in Canvas. You got to go where they are all the time. They're on their phones. They're not in their email inboxes. Email is, I'm always surprised when a student does email me back in a timely fashion, honestly. It is just not for that purpose. They're not using Teams, you know, they're all in our student orgs. We use GroupMe. I'm sure many of you do work with students, and other apps where they're actually at. So you have to meet them where they're at. And do quick polls with your students. See, like, how do you want to be communicated with? Where are you going to see my notification? Because it's gonna vary as well, right? With different students. Now it's hard from an advising standpoint because you want it documented, you want it in a formal, organization. You're not going to go to GroupMe with your advisees, right? Like you want it in our system and through our application. So it's tricky. I attended the AAC and U conference last 2 weeks ago, almost in Philadelphia, that focused on DEI. And there was some interesting add-ons to Canvas that would offer push notifications to cell phones. I won't get into it in too much detail, but I think some things are coming. And yeah, so I know we're at 3 o'clock, people have to run. So I just want to thank you all. I'll stay on and record, and I'll post this, the recording. You can check back later, but thank you for your attendance today. And thank you, Nicole and Michelle, again for facilitating. Enjoy the last session. So a few considerations that I would offer to all of our colleagues across the Commonwealth and to anyone working with students to consider when developing first-gen low-income student success programs and initiatives. It kind of goes back to what we consider as a staff and what we take into consideration. I had mentioned earlier a holistic approach to the development of our programs and services. So about 4 years ago, I had developed out a student success framework that has seen many iterations in its time. And so this student success framework that you see on your screen has a lot going on, and I actually have a full presentation on the components of this framework. But what I would like for you just to consider is just thinking about this as a balanced, successful student structure, right? So we've got at the core this goal that a student comes to the campus with to be successful and to achieve their goals. And that goal is supported not only by their own dreams and initiatives, but by the supports that we have in place for them. So academic advisors and their faculty and the external support that they may receive that help them move that goal, that very heavy, sometimes onerous goal, to its finish line, to fruition, which is hopefully the completion of a degree and the preparation for life after college. So we think about that, and then the values that the campus culture brings into it, and the systems, like we talked about communication and the culture and the connection that a student does or does not have. And then what influences that ecosystem, if you will, for a student. So this framework represents really a holistic ecosystem on a college campus for a student. And what you're looking at is a balanced one, right? And those bubbles around the corners are really what we call like our themes of influence. So these areas of their academic student life that can either propel or support their progress or create barriers or deter a student's progress. And so what does this mean? We have to be considering this when we're thinking about our programs and practices, right? Like, how is this fitting into the students' holistic approach towards achieving their goal? Are they missing certain structures of support in their relationships at the core, the nucleus of that framework? Are there certain influences that are overwhelming that are causing it to kind of be off kilter as they progress towards their goal? So my staff actually hadn't seen this. I did it very late last night as I was waiting for our keynote to get in from her delayed flight. But I kind of was like, what would it look like in this framework if a student didn't have a balanced situation, if they were in a negative culture in their campus or in their academic program where they didn't feel like they belonged, and communication, they weren't getting communications, and maybe in this situation you're looking at their wellness, their basic needs is so overwhelming to them that they can't really focus, like academics has taken a back seat. Career and life skills development is shrunk. Their explorational, their engagement on campus has really shrunk because they don't have time for that. They're so overwhelmed by their needs that they haven't really even thought about how to balance out this experience. And in this example here of this danger zone for a student, we put student success, but student success is in trouble because this student doesn't have external support. They haven't engaged with their faculty to help them get towards their goals. And maybe they've engaged with some staff, but they're not feeling connected to their advisor, or they're not responding or showing up for meetings. And so, that can put a student in this at-risk category, right? So I think when we think about what that looks like and all these elements that are in play in this ecosystem to kind of create a more holistic picture of success, so a student can be making progress, we need to think about how that translates into our programs and services. So they're not too off kilter in their focus, that they are holistic. And so I kind of created this, you know, going to my other response to one of the Q&A questions, I had created this graphic. Again, I threw this together. I was thinking about what this might look like. And then I just started to think about this idea of flowers, right? And it's spring, and, you know, it made me excited to kind of make these little flowers on the screen. But we think about those flowers, those things that look really good on a campus when you're walking through, those high impact practices that we can throw up on social media and put on a website. Oh, we have this and we have that, and it's so wonderful, and the students are thriving. And we know that the research tells us that many of these high impact practices actually do yield positive results and outcomes for the students that we're trying to serve. But what's even more important for us as higher education professionals in a whole wide variety of roles is to really be thinking about the support and foundation and how we are, you know, creating a sustainable system for those beautiful things that look beautiful, right? Because without the actual like high nutrient soil here in my little metaphor, those things will not be sustainable. They will not have the impact that we hope for them. They may look nice, but they're not going to have students that engage there for various reasons. They're not going to necessarily yield to the outcomes that we aspire that they would. And so we think about this in our role as professionals. It's really important to get into those spaces where we can continue to raise our voices and advocate for equitable policy, for financial literacy education for students, so that they, especially our first gen low income, right? So that they are getting the tools and they feel confident in the ability to talk about their situation with people that might be able to help them. We need reliable data. You know, I talked about the first gen indicator potentially only being 72% accurate. That's not okay. If we're going to serve these students, we need to know who these students are and be at least giving them the opportunity to identify themselves to us so that we can intervene in a timely fashion. And then I know it's been challenging times at the university. We've had a lot of turnover, a lot of unclear direction, a lot of resource scarcity and real budget resource cuts. So, you know, I think kind of that is a barrier that we face as an institution, but there's still creative ways around this that we can be there for our students that don't necessarily cost a lot. And I think at the end of the day, us on the ground with students really know the work. We know what needs to get done and how we can show up. But I think advocating for some of these systemic changes that we want to see might be a little bit more challenging right now due to all of this turnover, really. And then continual professional development, days like this to have conversations with our colleagues so that we can get stronger working together as an institution. We can learn from folks outside of this institution to really kind of continue to propel the work. So those are all just, I mean, this isn't an exhaustive list. It's just some things that I was thinking of that when I think about considerations for creating programs and services, we need to be thinking about these foundational elements and not just rushing straight to intervention. We can go to Home Depot and buy a whole bunch of flowers and put them in the ground, but if we're not watering them and putting them in soil that's actually going to help them, or putting them in sunlight or out of sunlight, whatever it might be, I kill a lot of plants at home. That's why I support students. That seems to work much better for me. But still, the metaphor still exists. So we need to be thinking about the conditions of the environment and what we can do to advocate for change in the environment to help our students have the most equitable chance for success. And on that note, I want to just thank you. We already did questions. Our resources are here. We'll share the slide deck with you all. But thank you all for maybe coming back and watching this recording, and for your questions ahead of the session presentation, and for your participation in the summit today. Take care, and please reach out if you have any other questions or you just want to connect to learn more or collaborate. Take care, everybody. Bye.